Well, thank you, Tony, for that. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I always like to say, what is a St Vincent's Institute? We are a medical research institute attached to St Vincent's Hospital, affiliate, actually we know a partner institute of Melbourne University, and we do all sorts of science, basic science. We started doing testing. If you're going to give any plasma in Australia now, we're testing it for diseases, just randomly. So it's one of the many reasons why cybersecurity has become quite important to us, because strangely enough, people like their personal details to be kept personal, private. I'm going to give this talk partially on what do I consider to be the basics of Mac security, but also sort of splitting it into two parts. What I see is like the really cutting edge or current threats, particularly aligned with identity that we were hearing about earlier, and then more of the hardening and framework side of things. I think it's fascinating looking at this year's lineup, all these great speakers we had. How many of them are talking about security? I look back and the very first security talk I could see on the XWorld website was Rich Troughton in 2016, and he was talking about SIP, and basically his premise was just deal with it, and I think we all just dealt with it. Not a problem. I actually gave one the next year on the Essential 8, or it wasn't actually the Essential 8 then, it was called something different. But now I think about 40% of the talks are actually cybersecurity or cybersecurity adjacent. So I think that really shows the increase in importance that organisations are doing for it. So I'm going to just run through them. Weird blank slide. First thing I say is use an MDM. Now you're going to go, obviously. But it's a building block. It's essential. You need it to do everything else. And if you're an organisation of any size, you almost certainly have one. But if you are a consultant, you work for an MSP, you may be thinking, well, should all of my customers have an MDM? And back in the days when Jeff were doing very expensive jump starts, should have called it that. Dan did R1. You might have said, what's the magic number for requiring an MDM for your fleet? And back then, I don't know, 100, 150, smaller companies did it. Now the number of Macs that you have that require an MDM is 1, because you just literally cannot be secure without it. Oh, okay. I need to look at my notes. The second thing is single sign-on. I'm going to get a bit angry now. I think that Apple and other identity providers have dropped the ball. Ever since Open Directory went away, we have not had a proper coherent solution on the Mac for doing things properly. I'm not even going to get started on secure token and how full disk encryption is less important, in my opinion, than single sign-on. And it's been very, very annoying trying to do modern single sign-on on Macs. I get that we're getting there, still not there yet. No, there we go. So, why do we want single sign-on? Well, it gives us account lifecycle. We don't have to provision accounts on the device, which is great. When people change the password, it's updated. When they leave the organisation, or if there's a cyber incident, we want to block them. We're getting it kind of. There's loads of sort of edge cases where it doesn't quite work for us. But that's sort of the premise that we want it for. We get multi-factor authentication. I don't care too much about MFA to get onto a Mac, but I care more about the MFA for the single sign-on, for reasons to come on to later. And there's a few situations where we don't get MFA. If you're waking up from sleep, obviously MFA requires an internet connection, and so forth. Maybe we need to enforce account policies, password length, password change frequency. In Australia, the government still says we have to change once a year, even though no other government in the world mandates that. So, it's a way that we can enforce that easily and we can audit it. But I think the main thing that SSO gives us is the ability to access resources. And that may be, at the moment, on-prem, we're talking about file shares. But really, I think the future is everything off-prem. Let's SSO on the Mac and then use that to access the resources everywhere else. The other thing that SSO gives us is a huge amount of security information. It goes into our SIEM, we have XDR, we can see all of the dodgy logons. it just gives us absolute insight. I want absolutely every service that we use to use SSO, whether it's a cloud service, an endpoint, we want it using SSO so that we capture it at that point. Talk you can watch tomorrow, I think it is. Cameron Kay is talking about managing multi-user Macs in a single-user world. I think there's going to be some interesting SSO talks, content there. Of course, the new hotness at the moment is platform SSO. Apple has sort of made it so open standard that anybody can do it with OAuth 2. Not anybody is doing it really. Microsoft and Okta are the only two who I think have a suitable product at the moment, and the Okta one is perhaps not quite there. Again, none of it is quite ready, standalone. It might work for you. It needs to improve, but there's certainly a lot of promise that's coming there. I'm looking forward to tomorrow, Eric talking about platform SSO in more detail. SSO gives us the ability, as I've mentioned before, to do MFA. As I said, I don't care too much about MFA to the Mac. I want to MFA to our services. And really we need to be using phishing-resistant MFA. What this prevents is something called adversary in the middle attacks. This happened to us earlier in the year. Somebody got phished, they put their username and password into a web form. It then did a number matching prompt in their Authenticator app. They then put the number matching, the number that was on their phone back in there. Their token got stolen. And we had multiple security steps all through this process that didn't stop this from happening. It was only when the attacker tried to use the token that it actually went, oh, hang on a moment, that's a known bad IP address. I'm going to then clamp down. So to prevent that, you've got to do phishing-resistant MFA. That is really at the moment 502, which are YubiKeys or Windows Hello for Business. Passkeys kind of work, but you know, I think the official guidance is really 502. If you're US government, you're probably using smart cards and certificates, but you don't see that a lot out of there, and significantly more expensive if you do it. Come on, Apple. Why don't we have Apple Hello for Business? You know, it just drives me mad that that's not built in. Platform SSO is going to give us something akin to it, but we're just not quite there yet. Once we're doing SSO, we can start to consider things like compliant device. I think I first saw compliant device about 10 years ago, and it was all about network access control. You can't get onto our wireless network unless your device has the latest antivirus, it has the latest OS versions, you don't know, updates and so on. But, you know, all sort of important things. But honestly, I think you should be managing most of those through your MDM processes anyway. I don't, you know, compliant devices, I don't see that as being the great part. The most important one to me, for me, is that the device is company owned. This is the new hotness. I keep on seeing it this year in particular. Why is this such a big security uplift for you, you might wonder? The way that a company device becomes compliant is because it's in your IDP as being a compliant device. How do you get into your IDP? Well, I'm talking Intune Okta. It means that you've had your device probably using DEP, although, is it DEP nowadays?
Automated device.
Thank you, I should know that. Automated device enrollment. And then your MDM has then said, okay, I'm going to put you into Intune. So the only way that a device can become compliant is if it's been through your proper processes, as long as you can't self-enroll. 99.999% of attacks are remote. If the attacker can't get into your applications because they don't have your device, you've got a massive security uplift. People are not stealing devices and using them to get onto your company resources. They're attacking them directly. I'm not saying it never happens, but the overwhelming majority of attacks are all remote. So if you can say the only way you can get into my Office 365, SharePoint, OneDrive, Google, whatever it might be, Salesforce, and the only way you can get into that is through a company device, a compliant device, it is a massive security uplift. I think your security teams, if they're not already doing this, are going to be pushing this really hard over the next 12 months. And I see this as being an absolutely mandatory thing. BYOD, if you're an academic organisation, you probably have students. It's quite hard. What do you do with all of these student devices? You want to have the same amount of security on those because they can still access your resources, get you in the press, all of those things. So I think you may have to consider enrolling BYOD devices. This is sometimes actually a point where maybe compliant device is a good thing. This is a ticket that we actually got earlier, just last month. When I'm trying to connect to the file share, it's on 13.3.1. They personally said what their Mac was. They couldn't access. Now, I'd love to say that that was our compliant device policy, but there was actually a permissions problem. But, you know, devices you don't control, you probably need to have a certain amount of compliance before they access your requirements. Beware the management overhead. You do not want to touch every single student device. And perhaps you'll have a lighter touch. Well, now we've got compliant device, let's build on that with conditional access. Conditional access is part of the authorization part of a logon. Authentication's already happened, username, password, MFA. We're now on to the authorization. This is what you can have access to. And we're saying that you can only have access to, for example, Salesforce, providing you've met all of these conditions. You can be quite granular in the way that you do it. And I'm just going to leap into an example here. This is our online HR platform. Here are all of our conditional access policies. We block high-risk sign-ins, legacy authentication, high-risk countries, a few test things. The one that is of note is we say, block unmanaged devices. And so say we filter, and if the device is compliant, you can get in. One of the problems with bringing on a policy like a compliant device is your fleet might not be ready for it. And so you can actually be granular with the way that you do it. And we've said if you are if you're in the IT team or the HR team, you can only access this from a compliant device, but everybody else can access it from their own device. The reason why we're happy to do this and take a slight risk on our security there is what we'd call the blast radius of an account compromise. If somebody in HR or IT has their account compromised, it could be a huge mess. But if it's just an individual user, it's only their own data. So we were quite happy to say, sure, compliant device for the people who are going to cause the biggest mess if they get compromised, but everybody else can just access it otherwise. This will change. This is a transition step. I would hope probably in a year's time, once we've dealt with all of the unmanaged devices, those groups will go and it will be compliant devices only. So, when you get back to work on Thursday, if you haven't already done it, do it for your MDM. If you're able to get into JavPro, Kanji, whatever it is, on a non-compliant device, I suggest you change that as quickly as you can. This is an artifact of platform SSO, being able to put the primary refresh token in secure enclave. And the primary refresh token is the authentication token that you get from Microsoft when you sign in via Entra. And it's just an OAuth2 token, but kind of like a super token that then does all other sign-in requests. Theft of these is a bit of a problem because basically that person is you for as long as they keep it. It can be like at least 90 days that somebody can masquerade as you and access all of your resources. And on Windows, it's sort of happened for a while that you've been able to store it in a TPM, which is their equivalent to Secure Enclave. But now, if you're using the Microsoft Platform SSO, you're able to hardware back your primary refresh token, I'm sort of glossing over some of the details, but it provides a mechanism to really stop token theft from your device. Otherwise, it's just sitting there, maybe encrypted on your device, and if you have anybody on your device or some malware that can steal it, you're in a world of hurt. Okay, so those are the emerging technologies. We'll go back to the more standard ones, still fairly new. I think we've seen this list before today. These are the various ways of hardening your Mac, the various sort of benchmarks that people are using, largely US Gov, apart from Indigo, which is German. I'm going to just illustrate this looking at CIS benchmarks. You can download this from the CIS website. There's a certain licensing to go through to get it, and it's a PDF that's about 500 pages long, showing you all of the steps that you need to do to harden your Macs. It's very approachable. It makes a lot of sense. There's nothing here I think that you'll look at and go, I don't get it. Here is one, ensure that the Mac App Store has automatic updates turned on. Makes sense, tells you why you should do it, what the rationale is, and what the impact. It is fundamentally a benchmark and hence an auditing framework. And so the key part to all of the things that it talks about is what the audit methodology is. For reasons I don't quite understand, they tend to do it all in JavaScript. So I tend to wash that through ChatGPT and we're back in Shell. Pretty straightforward. It does a defaults read on the relevant plist. If the condition's met, it comes back with true and it's a pass. If it fails, it presents a false. We'll then normally get what the remediation step is. As you can imagine, it's just the inverse. You do defaults right to the plist, or preferably you're going to use a profile. What's that look like in practice? I'm going to pick Jamf Pro as my example because that's what I use. You would perhaps make an extension attribute and then you would scope smart grouped. So you'd create a smart group with the extension attribute as its membership criteria. You would then create a script with the remediation. You would make a profile for the script and then you would scope it to the smart group, which is a lot of work. But what that gives you is what I would call desired state configuration management, so that if somebody changes it, it then just gets changed back, which is really important because things can change. It will revert you to compliance after maybe an OS update changes it, perhaps an application in its post or a pre-installation script would have changed something that you've set, and of course our beloved users may change things. And this way, by having it in that sort of desired state, we know that we're always going to revert to compliance. There's a few exceptions in the way it works. One of the things it tests for is SIP enabled. As you're probably aware, you can't re-enable SIP in an automated way. Instead, you've got to put your hands on the Mac, boot to recovery mode, and turn it off again. However, I would agree with them that they take a more of a nuke it from space approach and say if somebody's disabled SIP, let's just wipe it, which I agree with. One thing on that, you're probably not going to, how are you going to know that somebody's done that? Is it just at an audit point? I'd suggest if you're using Jamf that you would get the email notification on membership change so that you get alerted that somebody's done it on key policies. You're not going to want it on everything where there's an automatic revert to compliance, but for something like SIP, you probably want to know. There's obviously a lot of smart groups, extension attributes you have to make. We've already heard about the macOS compliance project. This is going to do a lot of that for you. There's a nice big script in there. You go through and you say, I want to do this one, this one, and this one. Hit the button and it's going to make all of those profiles for you. It's still not that easy, and so I think that fortunately our MDM vendors have come out. Jamf Protect now has this built in and will give you pretty dashboards on your compliance, and also Kanji has an equivalent way of running these benchmarks. You might ask, well, which ones do you run? I mean, obviously you want to do everything in the benchmark, yeah? Well, the CIS benchmark is quite pragmatic about it. It says, well, we've got two levels. Level one, probably not inhibit the utility of the technology beyond acceptable means. Now, my acceptable is not the same as your acceptable. So it's something that's going to have to suit your organisation. They also have a second level, which is more secure, and the second level may negatively inhibit the utility of performance of the technology. May is doing a lot of lifting there. I was thinking if you were told you needed to do CIS Benchmark 2, you might as well tell your users to get a PC. But not that bad. Where do we go? So be selective, look through them and think, well, do I really need to run that? Is that going to really negatively, is there going to be a business reason for not doing it? Advocate for your users. It's actually possible to pass an audit from this when you don't actually meet all of the controls. I recently had a CIS Cloud benchmark against Azure, and we had quite a bit of arguments back and forth with the auditor. And we lost on some and won on the others. But the point here was that we were the subject matter experts, the auditor was not. In general, you are the subject matter expert for your organisation. So please make sure that you just don't ruin the lives of your users by mindlessly going for the controls just because cyber have said that you need to. CIS themselves actually say that the guidance here are recommendations and not requirements. It's not like an ISO audit where you get certified. So they do understand, and they take into account that you might not need to do all of the things. You might be wondering which ones would you run and which ones wouldn't you. Default ones, well, yeah. Ensure the system's managed by MDM. Not that crazy for me to say it to begin with. Ensure the firewall's enabled. Ensure set date and time automatically is enabled. Funny enough, the reason they say for that one, I think is quite interesting, is that when you go traveling, it will the Mac will automatically set the time zone of where you are so that your log entries have the right date and time, is the rationale behind that. You know, you look at this and you go, this is probably on anyway, and we're happy with it. There are sensible ones which may have a little impact, but again, you can probably live with turning off AirDrop when you're not actually transferring files. Also prevents people sending you pictures at the airport or whatever. Turning off remote logon, internet sharing, ensure external intelligence extensions turned off. Yeah, so you know, probably very low impact. There are ones that you may wonder whether we should be getting rid of or not. Content caching disabled. I read their rationale. I'm not sure I fully agree with it. There's not actually a known threat to it. They just think that there's a theoretical threat. We live on a university network, so we don't care about our bandwidth. But if you've got branch offices, whatever, and they've got internet constraint, or you're on Starlink or whatever, content caching may be pretty essential to you. Some I find a bit aspirational. The show Wi-Fi status. It's so that your users are always aware of what Wi-Fi network they're on. I haven't met my users. And then, turning off Siri again, they consider it a security risk. If you have people in your office who like shouting at their computers, maybe they won't like it. Probably more for one that a user's going to change and you need to be aware of. We're going to get more information on that tomorrow from Martin and Stu, where they're talking about their implementation of the CIS benchmark in this very organisation here at Seek. It would be remiss of me not to talk about the Essential 8. And you may say, why do we care about the Essential 8? The Essential 8 is a maturity model. It's not a benchmark. It's not a framework for you to be following. Doesn't really apply to Macs. Doesn't really apply to the cloud. It's not that relevant. Why is the government trying to force it on us when it completely ignores most of the security best practices? The fact is, it doesn't matter. You have to do it because the government is saying you've got to do it. You're going to have contracts that say you have to do it. It's just something that we have to deal with. To refresh your memory, here are the various 8 things that you need to do. Captain John there gave a wonderful talk 2 years ago. My wife said, they said to us, oh, do you want to buy the hat for €8? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, no. I said, anyway, doesn't matter. This gives you a very Mac-specific take on the Essential 8, which was given in this very room 2 years ago. So from the Essential 8, I'm not sure that I really care about talking about all of them. Patching applications, yeah, you should be doing it. Patching operating systems. If you're not already doing that, you're not going to listen to me. Multi-factor, I think we've covered. Restricting Office macros, yeah, whatever. User application hardening, well, CIS benchmark, I think, covers that. Regular backups, yeah, don't store stuff on your Mac. Probably the best way of doing it. So I just want to touch on these two. Restrict admin privileges. Why? There's lots and lots of reasons to do this. My main reason is it stops the users undoing the settings you've done. If they can't change it back, they are stuck with whatever you've put there. Tomorrow, Marcus, this afternoon, today, very shortly, Marcus will be telling us the power of the dark side of admin rights, so I'm looking forward and ready to disagree. No. The other one was application control. We're generally talking about application whitelisting. It's kind of the inverse of antivirus, which is application blacklisting. We're only going to allow known good applications to run. You can either base it on a certificate that the application's been signed with or a hash of the binary that's actually going to run. Look, certificates are a lot easier. If you're an organisation of any size, you are going to have so many applications that you have to whitelist. If you're a university, I dread to think how many applications that you must have. but still hashes are stronger. The trouble with certificates, if you've got 1,000 organisations that are making software for you, which is perhaps not an exaggeration for a university, there's a reasonable chance that one or two of them are going to get compromised at some point, and then their certificate may be used for nefarious things. I mean, it's not like Microsoft are going to get compromised. It took them 3 months to revoke that certificate, just saying. Anyway, so hashes are stronger. I was really pleased to see last year out of JNUC that Japan Airlock, which is an Australian application whitelisting organisation, came up with this way of doing it. It's such an overhead normally to whitelist applications, and basically if Jamf installs it and you have this plugin, it gets whitelisted and trusted. So I think that's pretty cool. Tomorrow we have Harrison talking about Santa, which is an open source application whitelisting. I'm really looking forward to hearing how that's going to work in practice. So for more there. So this is a whistle-stop tour through basic Mac security. One thing you might say is basic? Not that basic. Maybe basic could have been called minimum. I'm not sure in this day and age you can get away without doing much of this. It is just literally the minimum amount of security you're going to need to do. But when you're going back to work on Thursday, you can say, well, which one do I do first? Perhaps we might want to know what's the most effective. Let's start with that one. Let's go for the biggest bang for our buck. I went to a talk in 2017 on this strategies to mitigate cybersecurity incidents, and you may see down here the relative security effectiveness. Some of them are in green, that means they're essential. There are 8 of those, which gives you a clue of where the Essential 8 name came from. The talk was given by the then head of the ASD, and he said all the things you could do, in his opinion, the most effective security control is application whitelisting. So basically, if it's not allowed to run, it can't do anything. Is that the right way of looking at it, though? I recently had a talk, we had a presentation from Rapid7, they're an incident response company, and this was their stats of the actual incident response engagements that they had done in the previous 12 months. Just to aggregate them for you, 7% were malware, 28% were vulnerabilities. These are not endpoint vulnerabilities, these are not Mac or Windows, these are VPN boxes, remote desktop file transfer appliances that are getting owned by the vulnerabilities. 71% was account compromise. The numbers might not add up to 100% just because there's a certain amount of overlap. Well, a few things to remember about this. This is based on incident response engagements. So it has to have been bad enough to have got an incident responder in, not a single computer getting owned. You're probably not going to roll incident response. Secondly, the organisation size. If you're getting incident response, probably your organisation of, I don't know, maybe their customers start at about 50 to 100 up to 5,000, 10,000. So the very small end of the market are not getting incident response. The small end of the lower end of the market are absolutely getting smashed by malware, no question about it. Also, just because there was incident response doesn't mean the attack was successful. It just means the incident response was rolled. I think that suppresses the malware level a little bit. And so my point here is that, funnily enough, I think antivirus has actually got to the stage where it's kind of good enough and is doing a lot of work for malware. I mean, how do you even get malware on a Mac nowadays is the other question. We're not passing around USB drives so much. File transfer is sort of baked in to everything we do. There's a lot less malware at the level of the organisations that we deal with. So what controls can we do? Well, to stop malware, antivirus, EDR is pretty good. If you see ransomware activity, your EDR is just going to kill it straight away. If you have a remote access toolkit, again, it's going to stop it. The vulnerabilities are not our problem. So how do we stop account compromises? We protect the user account. We're talking about phishing and brute force generally are the ways that accounts are compromised. And if we look back at the list here, which one of these are going to help us there? Well, it's single sign-on, phishing-resistant MFA, compliant device, conditional access, hardware-backed tokens. So my take-home message really is not that we shouldn't secure our Macs. We really need to. There are attacks that are going to get there. But the overwhelming compromises that are happening to our users. And so what I'd like you to think is we really need to use our Macs to secure our users. Thank you very much. If anybody's got a question, please.
Any questions for?
Cool, I just need to repeat it. So question is, security teams getting concerned about vulnerabilities, particularly those that haven't been exploited. I'm seeing with our vulnerability management that they actually have a exploitability metric with that. I think you're right though that generally there are a lot of vulnerabilities out there that are never abused, or to abuse them you're going to need to put malware on a Mac, which you're going to stop anyway. Educating your team, getting a risk assessment, getting them to actually show you when it's likely to happen, looking throughout the literature to see where it's happened elsewhere. And I think you'll find that there's not a huge amount of it.